Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. Have you ever wondered what the difference between table sugar or sucrose, and honey is? Right? I'm always asked this same question, and for some reason, I keep getting asked more frequently recently, which is better, right? Which one would you prefer to use? Well, look, ideally, you don't use either one of them, or if you do, use them very, very minimally. But another video why we want to keep our sugar consumption down. So, but what is the difference between the two? Well, I mean, we can talk about the basic chemistry. What is sucrose? Sucrose is what's known as a disaccharide sugar, right? You've got what are known as monosaccharides, and there's three basic monosaccharides that we consume in our diet. That would be glucose, fructose, and galactose. You may never have heard of galactose, but it is one of the monosaccharides, one of the three. Glucose is what we normally call blood sugar. Glucose is a not very sweet, but mildly sweet sugar that of course, yes, is in your blood. That is what your body's preferred source of carbohydrates, quote, carbohydrates would be, right? Simple carbs are sugars, and glucose, blood sugar, would be the main sugar that's used by your body for cellular respiration if it's going to use carbohydrates as a source of fuel. Now, glucose is also found in nature all over the place. It's kind of hard not to find it in fruits, certain vegetables, things like that. Sucrose is so that's glucose. That's a monosaccharide. You also have what's known as fructose, which you should all be fairly familiar with. Fructose, or fruit sugar, is another monosaccharide. Funny thing about fructose and glucose is they are essentially, from a molecular perspective, i.e., their compounds or what they're made of, are exactly the same. Six carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. So C6H12O6. Both fructose and glucose are if you were to write it down on a piece of paper and just did that, exactly the same. What's the difference? It's the actual molecular structure. Glucose as an aldehyde. You don't even need to know all that. But the point is that they have a very different effect on your body. So fructose and glucose, and then of course galactose, which we're not going to talk about. But what is the difference then between these guys? Well, like I said, glucose and fructose are monosaccharides, right? They are essentially at the most progressed point of metabolism that they can be at. You can't break glucose down technically into anything smaller subunit wise. Same thing with fructose. Everything you eat, if it's not glucose or fructose from a carbohydrate source, starches, right, are all going to ultimately get broken down into these most basic subunits, right? These monosaccharides. Sucrose, on the other hand, like table sugar here and what we find a lot in honey, sucrose is a disaccharide, okay, which means that it has two monosaccharide sugars that are molecularly connected, right? And those two, by the way, those two monosaccharides are fructose and glucose, generally in a 50-50 combination. So sucrose is basically 50% fructose, 50% glucose. Sucrose is a little bit sweeter than glucose, not as sweet as fructose, okay? So this stuff that you put into your coffee, right, it's fairly sweet, doesn't leave much of an aftertaste as far as I can tell, and will provide, just like fructose and glucose and any other basic carbohydrate, 4 calories per every gram that you consume. So calorically, it's no different than the potato that you're eating or any other carbohydrate that you're consuming, as long as you're dealing with just the sugar component of it. So this is by the way, this is a very purified form of the sugar. Now, sucrose comes generally from a commercial perspective, it's coming from sugarcane, beets. It could come from corn. You may have heard the term corn sweetener or corn syrup. These are all names for essentially the same basic compounds, which is sucrose. And remember, sucrose is a disaccharide, fructose, and glucose. The thing about sucrose table sugar is that it has that 50-50 match of glucose and fructose. Therein lies one of the main differences between sucrose, table sugar, and honey. And the reason, again, I like to talk to folks about this because I'm often asked, well, isn't honey better or healthier than regular table sugar? And the answer is yes and no. The answer is, yeah, of course it's healthier in one sense, in that it contains some minerals and a couple of little extra vitamins. Nothing to write home about, folks. Please, there's nothing special about honey when it comes to getting your vitamins and minerals. Really, for the most part, the only reason I ever say use honey over table sugar is the flavor. I kind of like the taste of honey, and there's many different types of honey out there. So, and I'm not endorsing the use of it. I'm just telling you that if you're going to do it, try the different honeys that are out there, different flavors, and you don't need a whole lot. Now, so 50-50 fructose and glucose. Well, what is this stuff? Well, honey, again, depends on where it's being harvested from, depends on a lot of different variables, is generally going to be higher percentage-wise in fructose than glucose, right? So there's sucrose in here, there's glucose in here, there's fructose. But honey, not as much as agave nectar, contains more fructose generally than the other sugars like glucose and sucrose, okay? So it does contain all three. Remember, table sugar is just sucrose. Honey contains glucose, sucrose, and fructose, but again, tends to have a higher percentage of fructose. Why is that good? Why is that a problem? Well, on its own, fructose is sort of unique in the sugar world because unlike glucose, unlike galactose, unlike the other sugars that we consume in our diet, fructose does not have a significant impact on elevation of blood sugar after you consume it. So, like I was saying, if a food is relatively high percentage-wise in fructose, then it will tend to have a more moderating blood sugar increasing effect. The problem, of course, is that honey contains sucrose and glucose as well. So you're going to get that insulin response. Of course, it's dose dependent, but the point is that fructose is often cited by physicians, and correctly so. They're cited as the preferred sweetener for individuals that have metabolic dysfunction, such as diabetics with blood sugar and glycemic control. And why is that? Because fructose, glucose, any of the monosaccharides, galactose, once you consume them, once you eat it, and I'm not going to, but pretend, okay, no, I'm just messing. Just imagine that you eat sugars in anything, in the food you eat, in the form of crystalline sucrose in honey. As soon as you eat it, goes into the stomach, goes into the small intestines, right? You all know this. They all go basically the same path. Some stuff will happen in the stomach, little bit. Of course, there'll be salivary amylase. Of course, you have already some breakdown of the disaccharide sucrose. Remember, glucose and fructose, they go right through. They don't need to be, quote, digested down. They're already in their most basic form. They go into the small intestines where they will be absorbed, right? Ultimately, and they will go from the small intestines, gets absorbed into the hepatic portal, which is an important term. The hepatic portal is simply that part of your circulatory system that takes all of the materials, nutrients from the small intestines and moves them directly to the liver, okay? The hepatic portal. So the liver gets first shot at everything, folks. And so all of that sugar that you consumed, whether it was sucrose, glucose, the sucrose will be broken down into the glucose and its fructose components, just like with the honey. Whatever was in the honey, it's going to get broken down ultimately into glucose and fructose. Whatever fructose was in there was already broken down. Whatever glucose is in there is already going to make its way through. But here's what happens is that fructose, unlike glucose and galactose, for instance, fructose gets stopped in the liver. Glucose passes right through the liver, goes right into the systemic circulation. Remember, the hepatic portal drives everything to the liver so that the liver can make an assessment and decide where everything should go, what should happen to it. Glucose just passes right through, generally just passes right through the liver for the most part, and goes right into the circulation where now it can impact insulin production. Okay, this is one of the reasons why, right, sucrose or any other type of sugars other than fructose will spike your insulin, right? Your pancreas will detect, right, the glucose in the blood system that comes from the liver, and it will then respond by increasing insulin production. That's normal. It's not a problem. Under certain circumstances, of course, with high doses of sugars, for instance, you get a very high insulin response. Okay, but the point is that glucose passes right through, but not fructose. Fructose is a unique animal in the sugar world, okay, simply because it's going to get stopped. Basically, the liver goes, okay, hang on, whoa, hang on a second. Hang on, we got a couple of things we need to do with you, right, before we can let you back out there. So because fructose does not get immediately pumped into the systemic circulation, it does not impact the insulin response in the same way that glucose does. I'm not saying it doesn't. Of course it does. It will have some minor impact. And again, this is why fructose-based sweeteners are used, or more physicians will tell their patients that are diabetic with metabolic issues to use a fructose sweetener versus standard sweeteners like sucrose or even pure glucose. So fructose sweeteners are preferred because, again, they're stopped in the liver. They do need to be processed, but they do have problems associated. Fructose has problems associated with it if you consume too much of it, okay? And so that's basically what we're dealing with when it comes to table sugar and honey. What is the difference? Table sugar is the highly processed, refined stuff that comes from sugarcane, beets, sometimes corn, but generally those two products are going to be the main ways that we get this stuff. 50-50 on the fructose glucose scale, and so this stuff will get broken down. Boom, the fructose does its thing, right? They both go through the hepatic portal into the liver, but the glucose that's in here goes right into your systemic circulation, and the fructose gets backed up. Honey, because it contains, for the most part, higher levels of fructose, may not have the same impact on blood sugar as sucrose does, although it depends on the total amount of sucrose and glucose that's in it as well. Remember, this is more of a conglomerate of sugars. This only has fructose and glucose. This has all of this with additional fructose in it. So it can be problematic in that ultimately it could potentially blunt the insulin response, depending on how much you consume. But it also, because of its relatively higher fructose percentage, cause some of the issues that we know lead to or are caused by high fructose consumption. One of those being triglyceride level increases. And that's, again, one of the things, but not going to get into it in this video. But that is the difference. If you like the flavor of honey, then for sure, use it instead of sugar. Ideally, what are you doing? You're trying to minimize, reduce, or even eliminate as best you can any of this, not only in its processed refined usage, but also in the foods that you eat on a regular basis. I hope this was helpful. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about with sugars and carbohydrates, but again, just to look at those two substances right there, letting your clients know that one is not necessarily better than the other from the standpoint of the insulin response that occurs when sugar is ingested. But I guess, if you're going to do it, then the flavor of honey is really going to, in my opinion, that's going to be the deciding factor. So you take that for what it's worth. Look, if you understand what I explained in this video today, please just in the comment section, type the word understood. Just let us know if you have any other questions or comments you'd like to make. Just keep in mind, every Wednesday night, this is Eastern Standard Time, okay? Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. So 7 Eastern, 6 Central, 5 Mountain. See, I can remember this. 5 Mountain, 4 Pacific, okay? So wherever one you're in, let's keep that in mind. It's 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, Quizlet live study session, 30 minutes. A lot of fun competition. You could win $50 as well if you win for that evening. So if you have any questions you want answered, leave them in the comments section below, and have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Thanks.